My wife cheated, gave me an STD, framed me for infidelity, asked for open marriage, left. Before diving into events, it's important to understand tensions between Jim and Janice Bello, 6 years earlier. Janice began to distance herself from family, emotionally, physically, influenced by social circle, preoccupied with gossip. She became preoccupied with neighborhood gossip, distractions, drifting away from her husband, kids, friendships deepened gap. Friendships with Marge, Mary, Nancy deepened the gap between her and Jim, dedicated to family, despite travel. This strain in their marriage fostered suspicion, misunderstanding, eventually leading to betrayal. During this time, Janice's behavior grew erratic. She neglected her family, leaving Jim to manage most responsibilities while she indulged. As she emotionally detached, Jim, still deeply committed to family, bore the brunt of it over time. The emotional divide between them widened. Janice, influenced by friends, wrongly suspected Jim of having an affair, leading her down a path of infidelity. Jim Bello felt miserable, but customs officers barely noticed him. As he passed through, they would later be criticized for not alerting health authorities, despite obvious condition. Where is she? Jim fumed, frustrated that Janice wasn't answering, despite knowing his flight schedule. He considered calling his daughter Carol to pick him up, even though he hated the idea of her navigating the airport traffic. When Carol answered, Jim explained he was feeling unwell, needed a ride. She quickly reassured him, saying her brother Steve was with her, they'd be there in half hour. Jim felt a mix of relief and frustration. He had warned Carol about driving to the airport, but he was grateful she had experience navigating it. Carol and Steve had been out shopping for Jim's birthday gift. Jim often put his family first, even scrimping on his own needs, like driving old minivan, while his wife and daughter had new cars. When Carol rushed to Steve, he sensed the urgency in her voice. Dad's sick at the airport, we've got to go, she said. I heard Mom talking last night. She knew when he was landing. Steve growled, I called her but it went straight to voicemail, Carol said, frustrated. It was typical for Janice to ignore her phone, a habit that irritated the family. While they were concerned, it wasn't unusual behavior for her. Half an hour later, they arrived at the airport. Jim, ever considerate, was waiting outside. Carol and Steve ran up to him, but Jim seemed disoriented. Sitting on a bench shivering, Dad, Steve yelled, panic rising. Oh, you got here so quick, it's only been 5 minutes, Jim muttered, clearly confused. Carol helped Jim to the car, while Steve grabbed the luggage. Despite cranking the heat, Jim couldn't stop shivering. Steve felt his father's burning forehead, suggested taking him to the hospital, but Jim just wanted to go home, oblivious to how serious his condition was. 40 minutes later, they arrived home. Carol helped her father out of the car while Steve carried the luggage outside. The door stood their neighbor Nancy, holding a store-bought coffee cake, looking surprised. Hello, Shrimp J. Jim greeted her using the nickname he gave to his wife's friends. Carol suppressed a grin. Nancy, confused, asked, what's going on and why is your father home? We picked him up at the airport, Mom forgot. And he's really sick, Carol explained. Nancy held the door open, and they heard Janice laughing inside, chatting with Marge. As Carol helped Jim into a chair, she turned to her mother, furious. Daddy called us because you forgot to pick him up. Now I know why you were busy with Marge's brother, she snapped. Janice, embarrassed, looked down as Steve carried in the suitcases. Carol, still angry, asked Steve to get a thermometer once he left. Carol wrapped her arms around Jim. Daddy, what do you think of infidelity? She asked. Glaring at her mother, Jim, disoriented, replied, infidelity is a terrible betrayal. It hurts everyone, especially the children. Could it be forgiven? Carol pressed. Jim, unaware of the situation, said, it wouldn't happen to me, but I could never forgive it. At that moment, one of Janice's friends, Mary, made an inappropriate comment about Viagra, which Jim dismissed, admitting it only gave him headaches. The women were shocked by his candidness, while Steve thought it was too much information. Suddenly, Marge's phone rang. What? That's impossible. Jim is here, she said, glancing at Janice, who was pale and shaken. Before anyone could react further, Steve shouted, Carol, Dad's temperature is almost 104. Carol quickly called emergency. and while waiting for the ambulance they used cold towels to try to lower Jim's fever. Despite his protests, they managed to keep him cool. Carol rode with Jim in the ambulance, silently daring her mother to object at the hospital. After hours of tests, doctors diagnosed a severe bacterial infection. Though they started him on antibiotics, they warned of possible long-term damage to his brain, heart, and other organs. As Carol and Steve sat praying for their father, Janice sat nearby trembling. Carol occasionally shot angry glares at her mother, her thoughts bitter. Over the past 6 years, Janice had become a neglectful wife and mother, more focused on gossip and her own interests. Jim had quietly carried the burden, with Carol helping as much as she could. The past 2 years had been especially tough for Carol. Jim had to travel often for work. After his previous employer went out of business, he hated the travel, but it was the only job he could find. The sacrifices they made were due to Janice, who had refused to move when Jim had been offered better paying jobs that required relocation. Even now, Carol thought bitterly Janice's refusal to move forced Jim to be away from home for long stretches. Carol now understood why her mother stayed. She knew what her mother had been doing with her friends, and during those late evenings, Carol's thoughts shifted to her younger sister Lisa, who was staying at their cousin's house as a reward for good grades. Carol wasn't sure if they should tell Lisa that Jim was in the hospital, possibly dying. The weekend was meant to be a celebration for Lisa and her cousins, but they knew Lisa would never forgive them if she missed the chance to say goodbye. Jim was admitted to the hospital and Dr. Richards gave them a serious update. Jim had an antibiotic-resistant bacterial infection. They had managed to lower his temperature, but the next 24 to 48 hours would be critical. There was a chance of permanent damage, but recovery was still possible. Dr. Richards asked about Jim's recent travels, and Carol answered that he had just returned from a business trip to Brazil. The doctor said he would contact the Center for Disease Control and Brazilian authorities. He allowed visitors but warned they would need to wear masks and gloves and limit their time with Jim, who was agitated and delusional. Carol explained that Jim always had terrible nightmares when sick and asked if anything could calm him down. Dr. Richards suggested holding his hand, but reiterated the need for safety precautions, including changing masks and gloves between visits. After thanking Dr. Richards, Carol decided she would stay with her father. She asked Steve to relieve her in a few hours, and told Janice with cold detachment that she could do as she pleased. Carol's focus was now on caring for her father and looking after her siblings, while her mother had become irrelevant to her. Carol put on a mask and gloves before entering Jim's hospital room. Seeing her father loosely restrained due to his agitation broke her heart, but she sat beside him and took his hand. "Daddy, it's Carol. I'm here. Everything's going to be okay," she reassured him, her voice shaky with emotion. Jim weakly responded, confusing the moment with memories of asking if she'd done her homework. Carol laughed softly and reassured him, playing a long "Yes, Daddy, everything's fine. You go to sleep now." As Jim relaxed, the door opened, expecting her brother. Carol was surprised to see her mother. Janice quietly took Jim's other hand, her face full of sorrow, though Carol was skeptical of her sincerity, thinking it was all an act. Resentment burned inside Carol, but she held back her anger to avoid disturbing her father. Soon Steve entered, standing by Carol's side, tears streaming down his face. "I love you, Dad," he whispered. He told Carol that Marge would drive them home and that he'd return in 7 hours. He asked Janice if she was coming, and she left silently with her head bowed for over an hour. Carol stayed with her father, comforting him whenever he became restless but overwhelmed. She stepped out to take a break. After removing her mask and gloves, she noticed her mother sitting pale and distraught, with Nancy trying to console her. Carol couldn't resist a sarcastic remark about her father still sleeping in the bathroom. Carol took a moment to call her best friend Linda, who immediately offered help. Then she called her father's best friend Ben, but reached Ben's partner Mark instead. Carol broke down, telling him about Jim's critical condition. Mark reassured her, promising to come right away. Even though Ben was out of the country, Mark hurriedly dressed, grabbed the checkbook and the emergency credit card with a $100,000 limit. Determined to do whatever it took, he sped to the hospital, where he found Janice in An unfamiliar woman sitting in the hall outside Jim's room. Janice looked distraught. Janice, how are you? Is that Jim's room? Mark asked. Janice, filled with grief, nodded yes. Carol's inside. I'm here for you, Janice, Mark said gently, but Janice's expression only worsened. Feeling unsure, Mark introduced himself. To the other woman, I'm Nancy, a neighbor, she said. Mark, sensing something was off, thanked her for supporting Janice, and headed into Jim's room after Nancy reminded him to wear a mask and gloves inside. Carol woke as Mark entered. Her relief was palpable. Uncle Mark, she whispered, Dad's stable. I'm so glad you're here. Mark knelt beside her and asked what was happening. Carol shared everything from Jim's call to her growing certainty that Janice was cheating. Mark listened, shocked, and gently asked, Are you sure? Maybe there's another explanation, but Carol was firm. She described Janice's behavior over the years, concluding, I've basically accused her of infidelity. And she never denied it. Mark stayed with Carol for 2 hours, troubled by the situation and the promise she made him keep. He decided he'd have to tell Ben, but trusted Ben to help handle the situation carefully. If things got worse, he would break the promise. After a while, Mark excused himself outside. Janice and Nancy were still sitting in the hallway. Mark, recalling the bond he had with Ben's mother Grace, felt compelled to act as she would have. He knelt before Janice and gently took her hands. Janice, what's going on? He asked softly. Janice, wide-eyed and panicked, shook her head, unable to respond. Frustrated, Mark stood, and unable to hold back, said bluntly, Grace would have kicked your bum for this. Janice broke down, sobbing uncontrollably into Nancy's arms. The next day, Carol, Steve, and Mark met to discuss their suspicions about Janice. Steve, being tech-savvy, offered to secretly record Janice, with cameras, microphones, and a voice-activated record in her car. Over a few days, they gathered shocking information. Jim survived the critical 48-hour period and began to recover. Lisa, unaware of how serious it was, visited briefly. The Center for Disease Control traced Jim's infection to a medical lab in Brazil where safety protocols had been ignored. Jim's employer promised to keep him on full pay and hinted at a possible settlement for his suffering. Doctors estimated he would need several weeks in the hospital, followed by more recovery at home. Jim noticed Janice rarely visited him, which hurt him deeply. A week later, Ben returned from his trip, and Mark, with Carol's permission, told him the full story. They agreed Carol would lead their efforts, with Ben and Mark offering support and advice. Steve's surveillance revealed disturbing details, including that Jim's initial tests had shown signs of syphilis, though later tests were negative, likely due to the antibiotics. The doctor approached Janice, who agreed to get tested. The results confirmed she had an advanced infection, and her lovers needed to be tested too. Marge arranged for the test to stay confidential in exchange for financial help with the nurses' bills. Carol and her friends were furious about Janice's multiple affairs. Carol confronted her mother, telling her she was taking Lisa to Aunt Penny, and demanded Janice and her friends meet the next day. If they didn't, Carol threatened to get a lawyer for Jim and go to the sheriff. With evidence of bribery shaken, Janice agreed. Carol also called Nancy, who had tried to stop the situation but was ignored by Janice. Nancy agreed to join the meeting. The next day, Carol, Ben, and Mark confronted Janice, Marge, and Mary. Steve, unable to handle the emotional toll, stayed away. At the dining room table, Carol stood with the men behind her, determined to stay calm. This is what we know, Carol began. We have proof, and if you deny it, we'll go to the sheriff and get a lawyer for Daddy. She looked directly at Marge. You two convinced yourselves that you saw Daddy with another woman at the Hilton, took terrible photos, and manipulated Mother into believing he was cheating. Turning to Janice, Carol's voice hardened. Instead of talking to Daddy, you let them push you to having your own affair. Nancy tried to stop you, but you ignored her. Janice sat visibly shaken while Carol maintained control of the situation. Janice sat in stunned silence as Carol laid out the harsh truth. You've ignored your family for so long that you let Marge and Mary manipulate you. Don't even try to deny it. We found the hidden copy of Mr. Henderson's report. The photos and video of Daddy's lookalike. There's no way anyone could have believed that was him. They must have faked more evidence to convince you if needed. We'll prove it in court. Carol's tone darkened as she turned to Marge and Mary. You two acted like her pimps, finding her not just one lover but four. She did things for them she never did for Daddy while Daddy was in Japan and Korea. She had dates then while he was in Brazil. She slept with Marge's brother and gave Daddy syphilis. You wore the lingerie for him, didn't you? You mother the same. Lingerie you never wore for Daddy. We still don't know if you've passed HIV to him. Mark and Ben exchanged nervous glances as Carol's grew. Meanwhile, Janice collapsed on the dining table, overwhelmed. Nancy, Marge, and Mary looked terrified. Carol continued, her voice dripping with contempt. You hired a detective to dig up evidence on Daddy, planning to confront and humiliate him. Well, now I control this. Do what I say, or there will be jail time in lawsuits. Marge, Mary, you'll be back tomorrow at 2. Get out. Humiliated, Marge and Mary left quietly. Mark helped Janice upstairs, followed by Ben, who carried a box of family memories. Janice curled up on the bed, completely defeated. Carol knelt beside her mother. You need to decide if you want to stay married to Daddy and part of this family. If you do, I'll help. If you want to leave, I'll still love you, but the decision is yours. Carol opened the box of family photos and videos. These are the memories you've forgotten lately. You're not in many of them. You were too busy with your friends. Janice stared at the item, speechless. I still love you, Carol said softly. I'm furious, but I love you. If you decide to leave, I'll still love you, but it's your choice. Carol stood and asked Nancy to stay with her mother. I'll be back tomorrow at noon for your answer, she said, kissing her mother on the forehead before leaving. Janice lay curled up, sobbing quietly as Nancy watched. She thought, how did I let this happen? She had sensed things were wrong but hadn't pushed hard enough. Marge and Mary were manipulative, but Janice used to be smarter now. It was up to Janice to fix what she had broken. That night, Nancy stayed with Janice, comforting her and helping her process the situation. They talked about the past, Jim's illness, and how to repair the damage. By morning, something had changed in Janice. With a renewed sense of purpose, she played old family tapes and sorted through the photo albums. Realizing how much she had taken for granted, the simple, precious moments of family life 6 years ago, Janice grew bored with her life and got caught up in gossip and influenced by Marge's lies and manipulation. Now faced with the consequences, she realized how lonely and bitter she had become. I'm like Scrooge, she thought, wondering if she could still redeem herself. The next day, Carol returned to find Janice ready, washed, dressed, and determined, surprised by her mother's transformation. Carol asked, do you have anything to say? Janice, holding back tears, confessed, what I did to your father and this family is terrible. I've been living in a fantasy, ignoring the damage I caused. I'm so sorry it took this to wake me up. Please give me another chance. I know I'll make mistakes, but I'll keep crying. Don't leave me. Carol softened. We won't throw you away. We love you, but do you want to stay married to Daddy? Janice admitted she still loved Jim but doubted he could forgive her. I cheated on him 6 times and gave him an STD, maybe even HIV. How could he stay with me? Carol explained that Ben had insured all but one of the men tested negative for syphilis and HIV, and they were hopeful Janice hadn't contracted anything worse. She reassured Janice that the family had agreed not to tell Jim about the affair unless he asked directly. It's up to you now. Make him feel loved so he never asks. Spend more time with him at the hospital. He's hurting because you've avoided him. Janice nodded, processing it all. Carol then asked, why did you believe Daddy was cheating? Those photos were terrible. Nancy chimed in, explaining that it was Mary who convinced them. Jim was staying at the Hilton and cheating. They had never read the detective's report. Carol, exasperated, revealed the truth. The man they thought was Jim was actually someone else, moving to the area with his fiancée. Mary had lied. Nancy added, we should have questioned her. She just wanted to create drama. Janice, stricken with guilt, admitted, I should have trusted your father. Carol replied coldly, don't worry, I'll deal with Marge and Mary. They hurt this family and I'll make them pay. Janice pleaded with Carol to stop, but Carol was resolute. There's no discussion, they're going to pay. Carol then laid out conditions. For her mother's redemption, you need therapy, which Uncle Ben will cover. Cut off all contact with Marge and Mary unless we're present. Encourage Daddy to move like he's always wanted and support him in changing jobs if he wants. And what about your money? Janice confessed that she had contributed little to household finances, spending most of her income on clothes and expensive meals. I've got a secret savings account, but it's not much. Carol was shocked. You don't have that many clothes? Janice laughed bitterly. You've never noticed I dress too sharp for an elementary teacher. That pure $1,500. The cheapest pantsuit in my closet is $800. None of my shoes cost less than $300. Janice sighed, feeling the weight of her mistakes. I guess I wanted to look like the women in my soap operas. I loved how the staff at expensive stores treated me like royalty. I also go to a spa 2 or 3 times a month, spending $300 to $500 each visit. That's where my money goes. Mother, you need to stop, Carol said firmly. Uncle Ben and I have reviewed the family finances. We in bad shape. We hoped you had a secret savings account with tens of thousands, but you only have about 10,000. Not enough for a move, a new car for Daddy, or college for Steve and me. Janice cried, overwhelmed by her failures. I'm so sorry. I have nearly 10,000 saved, but it's not enough. We'll figure out the money, Carol reassured. I'll talk to Uncle Ben and Uncle Mark. They love Daddy and will help. But do you agree to our conditions? Yes, Janice replied, hopeful. I'll do anything. Do you really think Ben and Mark will help? They will, Carol assured her, and if not, I'll stop playing pickleball with them, she joked, lightening the mood. Janice laughed through her tears. Wait, Carol said, suddenly returning with a shopping bag. I have a condition. You did things for those men you never did for Daddy. You wore the lingerie he bought for them, not him. You'll burn that lingerie and buy new things for Daddy. Janice, stunned, remained silent as Carol continued. Quit the spas, start exercising, and become Daddy's dream. I bought some books on how to please your man. You'll read them, memorize them, and live them. You'll wake Daddy up with a kiss every morning. Let him know you see him as an ex-man. If you have to fake it, be a good actress. If you don't, I'll make sure he divorces you and find someone who will. Janice sat in, but realized Carol was right. She owed this to Jim. Looking Carol in the eyes, she nodded. You're right, I agree with your condition. Carol smiled. Thank you. Get ready, Ben and Mark will be here at 2. At 2 sharp, Marge and Mary arrived, clearly uncomfortable. Carol stood in front of them, cold and calculating. I have rules and questions. If you don't follow the rules or lie, we go to the sheriff and sue you. Do you understand? Both women nodded nervously. We know. Mary lied about following my father from the airport, Carol said. I won't ask if you were in on it, Marge, but I won't be as forgiving with the other questions. Carol paced before demanding, who are the other 3 men and how do we find them? Marge hesitated but confessed, I found 2 and Mary found 2. My second was Tom Williams, an X-ray tech at the hospital. Is he married? No, we'll handle him. Mary, what about your 2? Carol asked, stepping behind her chair. Mary hesitated, but Carol wasn't having it. She grabbed Mary's hair, slammed her forehead against the table, and put her in a chokehold. Gasping, Mary blurted, one is a delivery guy named Ted, but I don't know his last name. The other is a guy the first met online. Jack, I have his address. Good, Carol said, releasing her. She turned to Marge. Where did it happen? Marge, defeated, admitted once at a hotel, twice at Mary's, 3 times at my house. Who else knows about the affair? Carol asked. Marge confessed she told her sister and a coworker, while Mary admitted she had gossiped to several people. You go back and clear my mother's name, Carol warned. If you don't, my father will find out and I'll come after you. Both women nodded, terrified. You'll cut ties with my mother and Nancy unless I say otherwise, and in 2 weeks you'll face me in a fight. I'm going to make you pay. Marge and Mary, realizing Carol was serious, scrambled to leave. After they were gone, Carol collapsed into a chair, exhausted. Acting tough makes me tired, she muttered. Ben brought her water as Janice and Nancy entered. Are they gone? Nancy asked. Yep, Ben said with a grin. Carol scared them off. After challenging them to a fight, Janice, alarmed, said, you can't do that, Carol. Don't worry, Mama, Carol reassured her. I've had years of self-defense training. They'll get hurt, not me. Ben then told Janice they had leads on the other men, and he and Mark would deal with them. Carol expressed concern for Ben's reputation, but he assured her he was fine. Those men knew you were married, Janice. They need to feel some pain. No, Janice said, surprising them. I need to deal with them. I heard Jim, and I'll be paying for it. They need to learn not to mess with a married woman. Ben nodded. We'll make plans later. For now, let him relax. Janice agreed and said, I need to visit Jim at the hospital. Turning to Carol, she added, I know I've lost some of your respect, but I'm working to earn it back. Carol smiled. You're starting to, and you never lost my love. Joked, I'll stay home and catch up on homework. I'll get Uncle Ben to do it for me. Ben and Mark chuckled, and everyone exchanged hugs with Janice, apologizing repeatedly Then she and Nancy left for the hospital. Carol headed upstairs to rest while Ben and Mark stayed behind to help. Mark went grocery shopping and returned to make Grandma Grace's chicken and dumplings, cornbread and pecan pie. Steve and Lisa came back from the mall and Ben gave Steve a brief rundown of the situation, sensing Steve was trying to avoid thinking about it. After Mark's delicious dinner, Ben helped Carol with her homework, and they all played pickleball, a family tradition. During the game, Carol shared that her mother had spent most of her money on expensive clothes, saving only around $10,000. Far short of what they needed for Jim's move or a new car. Ben, looking at his cards calmly, said, "Carol, I have more money than I could ever spend. Your dad knows that, but he's too proud to ask. He feels like he's failed financially and that eats at him. We need to help." Without bruising his pride, Mark agreed, suggesting they add $30,000 to Janice's savings. Ben nodded. "We tell Jim it was saved for emergencies in college." Carol, emotional, apologized for needing their help, but Ben reassured her, "Your family, I could give $1 million if needed. The only issue is your dad's pride." Carol, tearing up, said, "I love you, Uncle Ben." Ben smiled warmly. "I love you too, Carol." Mark lightened the mood by suggesting they buy a partially completed house near Aunt Penny's and finish it themselves. Ben protested about painting, but they agreed to hire out the more difficult tasks. The conversation shifted to planning for Jim's recovery, discussing a newer car and how to support him when he got home. At the hospital, Janice and Nancy brought magazines and books for Jim. Janice was nervous, hoping he would be asleep when she arrived so he'd wake to find her by his side. As they neared the room, they heard Jim talking to his boss, Brian Wilkins. Brian reassured Jim, saying, "Don't worry about work, we've got you covered. Workers' comp, full pay, bonuses, and your medical bills. Take the time you need to recover." Jim, grateful, thanked him. Brian left the room, and Janice pulled Nancy aside until he was out of sight. Once clear, Janice took a deep breath and entered Jim's room. He lay there, pale and thinner than she remembered sleeping. Seeing him so vulnerable filled her with guilt. She sat by his side, gently taking his hand. "I won't leave you again, Jim. I'll make this right," vowed Nancy. Quietly sat nearby, flipping through a magazine. Jim, half awake, felt the light touch and assumed it was one of his daughters. Opening his eyes, he was surprised to see Janice. "Hey babe," he said softly, a faint smile on his face. "Hey Jim," she whispered, heart aching. "How are you?" she asked, trying to stay steady. Jim, surprised by her affection, replied, "I'm doing okay. Still weak, but the infection is clearing up. I'll need physical therapy and more antibiotics, but I'm on track." "I'm so glad," Janice said, trying to sound upbeat. "I've been worried about you." Jim frowned. "Where have you been? I've barely seen you. I don't want to make you feel bad, but do you even love me anymore?" "Oh Jim," Janice's voice trembled, "I do love you. I'm so sorry I haven't been here. I've been a wreck, but I'm going to be here for you from now on. Please give me a chance." Jim sighed. "Okay, but we're the parents, Janice. We don't have the luxury of falling apart. You've got to stay strong for the kids. Ben and Mark are always willing to help, but we need to give 100% to our family." Janice's guilt deepened, knowing he didn't understand the full extent of her betrayal. She forced herself to stay calm. "You're right, I need to do better." Jim smiled weakly. "I've missed you. I'm glad you're here now." "I'm glad too," Janice replied, barely holding it together. "I'll do better, I promise." They talked about practical matters, bills, the kids, and Jim's work. He mentioned that Ben had been helping with finances and that his pay would go directly into their account, along with possible compensation for his illness. Janice, feeling the weight of her lies, offered a partial truth. "Jim, I've been saving some money, nearly $40,000. I should have contributed more, but from now on 2/3 of my pay will go into the household account." Jim, trusting as ever, smiled. "That's amazing, Janice. Thank you for stepping up. I love you." Janice felt crushed by guilt. She didn't deserve his gratitude. Forcing a smile, she replied, "I'm just glad I can help." Jim, exhausted from the conversation, soon drifted back to sleep. Janice sat by his side, holding his hand, guilt overwhelming her. Nancy, who had overheard everything, thought Jim was too kind and forgiving. He had always been the protector, patrolling the neighborhood at night to keep everyone safe, yet here he was vulnerable and unaware of Janice's betrayal. Nancy thought maybe Jim needed therapy just as much as Janice. When Jim woke briefly, they chatted about small things, including bringing Nancy into the conversation. However, Jim soon grew tired and asked them to leave before he fell asleep again. Though Janice wanted to stay, she had to work the next day to fulfill her new financial responsibilities. Before leaving, she promised to return the next evening. The following Monday, Ben's expert gathered information on Janice's 4 lovers. By Tuesday, 3 of them, excluding Danny, were warned by an intermediary about Janice's STD and urged to get tested. They complied, agreeing to share their results. Ben, Mark, and Carol postponed their plans for revenge until the results were in, deciding to deal with Danny last. After receiving the tests, only Danny had an STD and they were ready to move forward. During this time, Janice began seeing a new therapist, Dr. Michelle Ward, a respected author and psychiatrist whom Ben had met through social circles. Over 3 sessions, Janice recounted her story, and Dr. Ward, though polite, made it clear how selfish and immature Janice had been throughout her marriage. Janice had kept her finances separate, spent money on herself, and failed to appreciate Jim's sacrifices. Worse, she let herself believe a ridiculous lie about Jim and cheated on him with multiple men. Dr. Ward, understanding Janice's tendency to blame others, felt the only way to help her was to confront her with the full extent of her mistakes. She found it hard to believe Jim had tolerated so much, wondering if he had been too lenient. Over the years, in the afternoons, Carol would drive herself and her siblings to visit their dad at the hospital. Evenings were spent sparring at the dojo or working out at home. On Friday, the day before Carol's fight with Mary, Jim was ready to come home. They had set up a hospital bed in the master bedroom, leaving space for their king-sized bed. Janice, Ben, and Mark went to pick up Jim, while the kids stayed home preparing a banner to welcome him when Jim arrived. Exhausted, he used a walker to slowly make his way into the house. Reaching the stairs, he struggled to climb each step, taking minutes as he shook with fatigue. Halfway up, Jim collapsed into a sitting position, reassuring his panicked family that he just needed to rest. Ben and Mark decided to help, lifting him the rest of the way. They settled him into the hospital bed next to the king bed, where Janice insisted on staying close. Jim fell asleep quickly and Janice lay beside him, her arm draped over him. When she didn't come down after an hour, Lisa peeked in and saw her parents fast asleep together. Comforted, Lisa believed her dad would make everything better. On Saturday, the day of the fight, Mary met Carol at an abandoned factory that Mark had prepared, covering the floor with foam and tarps. Marge drove Mary, who had been exercising and even trying self-defense classes. Much to her husband's confusion, despite her efforts, Mary was unprepared for a real fight. Carol, dressed in sportswear, planned to tire Mary out before landing serious blows. After just 10 minutes, Carol started with light slaps and punches, but within 20 minutes Mary was a sobbing mess, begging for mercy. The spectators, including Janice, were shocked, and even Janice thought it was time to stop. Carol, disappointed, had expected a tougher fight but found Mary's breakdown pathetic. Carol decided she needed to ensure Mary wouldn't forget this moment. She had a dark thought but realized her initial idea would mess up the tarp and get Mark in trouble. Instead, she grabbed Mary's hair and dragged her toward the front office. Mary screamed in pain and Carol told her to start crawling or walk if it hurt too much. "Don't worry, the fight's over, we'll be back in 5 minutes," Carol said to the others. In a dirty bathroom, she threw Mary on the floor and knocked her 3 times, and spat on her, telling her to shut up. "You getting off easy. Don't ever cross me again," Carol warned, before rejoining the others. "Time to go home, Marge, your turn is tomorrow," Carol said. Mark and Ben joked Adrian as they left, but Carol was unimpressed. "I trained 2 weeks for that. Lisa could have done it with one hand, and I know Marge is in worse shape." Janice cautioned. "Don't get overconfident. Marge used to be athletic." The next day, Marge did put up more of a fight, lasting 40 minutes before collapsing in exhaustion. Carol gave her some bruises, but not as many as she'd hoped. Marge apologized and told Janice she hoped things would work out with Jim. Now it was time to deal with Janice's 4 lovers. Ben and Mark used makeup and padding to transform into intimidating figures. Mark as a thug and Ben as a Japanese yakuza. Janice, playing herself, carried a taser just in case. Their plan involved confronting the men near dumpsters, intimidating them, and then tossing them inside with zip ties on the lid to delay them but allow escape. Danny was saved for last. Tired from work, he was throwing out his trash when Janice And her team approached. She had even prepared the dumpster with rats and snakes. "Remember me, Danny?" Janice asked. Danny sighed. Realizing what was happening, "I'm sorry about the syphilis, Janice. I've tested negative for HIV so far and I hope it stays that way." Janice, surprised by his calmness, pressed on angrily. "You helped me betray my husband. You might have known Jim never cheated. I shouldn't have done it." "I'm sorry," Danny replied calmly, frustrated that her plan wasn't going as imagined. Janice pointed to Ben, claiming he was a friend from Japan, there to settle a debt. "You'll keep quiet and I want you out of the state in a week," she demanded. Danny raised an eyebrow, unfazed. "You've got to be kidding me," enraged Janice. As rehearsed, shot Danny in the groin with the taser. Mark and Ben were shocked and scared. This wasn't part of the plan. Danny collapsed in pain from the tasering for 30 seconds. When he recovered, he quickly removed the darts, grateful they had missed their mark. Mark rushed over, grabbed the taser from Janice, and the situation spiraled further. Danny, angry, got to his feet and yelled, "You idiots, I know who you are. Ben and Mark, with your terrible disguises you used a taser and I control hidden cameras around here. I could easily report you." Janice, Ben and Mark stood there, realizing how out of control things had gotten. Danny then unleashed a tirade, admitting he had syphilis from his ex-fiancée and blaming her betrayal for the infection. He knew Jim wasn't cheating and had planned to tell him about Janice's affair, but Jim's illness had delayed him. He revealed that he had photos of Janice and could expose her at any time, but agreed to stay quiet as long as she stayed faithful. Danny was furious as he called out Janice's hypocrisy, reminding her how she had begged for their encounters. With that, he left, pushing past Mark and Ben. Janice, shaken, collapsed to the ground, overwhelmed by the failure of her plan. As Danny walked away, she vowed to rededicate herself to Jim and her family. Ben and Mark, exchanging worried glances, wondered if they had made a mistake in supporting her. Jim slowly recovered and returned to work part-time 2 months after falling ill. He was beginning to receive more affection from Janice, but she had to tell him they couldn't be physically engaged for at least another month due to her ongoing infection. Mark found a great deal on a partially built house near Penny's area, and with some hired help for big tasks and the family handling smaller jobs, it would cost less than their current home. Overhearing this, Janice mentioned it would be nice to live closer to her sister, and that she could likely get a job transfer. Jim considered fixing up his old minivan, but Ben suggested getting something new, or eventually finding a nearly new minivan with a full warranty at a great price. 3 months after Jim's hospitalization, Janice's infection was under control and Danny and his ex both tested negative for HIV. One night, Janice, now fitter from exercising, surprised Jim with a passionate kiss, and they reconnected emotionally and physically. Jim returned to work full-time in a new department, moving from engineering to sales. His skill in closing deals and troubleshooting had been noticed, and his absence during his illness led to a drop in sales and customer satisfaction. To retain him, the company gave him a 50% raise, pushing his income into 6 figures for the first time. Despite disliking travel, the pay and company support motivated him to stay. That spring, Janice befriended Sally, a BMW sales manager who offered her a part-time sales position. Sally believed Janice's charm and style could boost sales, especially with female customers who preferred buying from women. Janice, enjoying the idea, discussed it with Jim and Carol, who both supported her. Janice thrived in sales, forming bonds with customers. Through her love of fashion and socializing, she excelled with both women and men, turning her part-time job into a success. By summer, working full-time, Janice nearly doubled her income, enjoying her new career and balancing it with her family life. That summer, their new home was finished. Whenever Jim returned from a sales trip, he would find Ben, Mark, Carol, and Steve pretending to be worn out, while the real construction workers were speeding down the road. They nearly got caught a couple of times and Jim grew suspicious, but he never had any solid proof that he was being duped. Ben even had a deal with the suppliers. Jim was billed for 60% to 80% of the actual costs, and Ben covered the difference. The kitchen, which should have cost Jim and Janice over $25,000, ended up only costing $1,600. Ben knew Jim was making more money, but he just wanted to help out his brother and family. Jim was thrilled he was living in the country earning more and had his loving wife back. 6 months after starting therapy, Janice decided to quit. She felt she had learned enough about herself, and with 2 jobs, she didn't have time for it anymore. Plus Dr. Ward could be very tough on her, and Janice grew tired of the subtle critiques. No one's perfect. Relax, she thought. Instead of heading to a 4-year university, Carol chose to attend the local college. For her first 2 years, just like her dad and Uncle Ben had done, she had some doubts and wanted to stay close to home. Janice and Jim began going out weekly to romantic spots. Janice had forgotten what a great dancer Jim was. It was the middle of the 2nd summer after Jim's illness. The kids were away at a water park for a few days, a trip Janice had planned. Jim felt content as he entered the house, excited for some alone time with Janice, but instead of finding her waiting in a neggle, he saw her sitting at the dining room table, dressed formally with a small stack of papers in front of her. "Jim, I'm sorry, honey, but we need to talk," Janice said softly, motioning for him to sit next to her. A sinking feeling welled up in Jim's stomach. "Jim, I love you, but not in the way a wife should love her husband. I love you as family, as the father of my children, but I need more. I need something beyond the role of wife and mother. I'm so sorry, Jim, I've tried," Janice said, her voice breaking. Jim leaned back, shocked. He stared at her. This stranger, he thought. Janice's eyes partly closed, expected Jim to move closer and comfort her, but it didn't happen. She looked up and saw him leaning back, his face a mix of disbelief and confusion. "Janice, things have been so good lately, this can't be real." "Are you joking?" Jim asked, his heart sinking further. "I'm sorry, Jim," she said, sliding the papers toward him. "These are the divorce papers. I'm asking for very little. I know you've paid for nearly everything. I think we should share custody of the kids. I've already put down a deposit on a condo," she added. In truth, she had already bought a condo from one of her clients and furnished it. "This is so hard for me, Jim. Please understand, I've already moved my things out. I have to go now. This is too hard," Janice said, standing up. Softly crying, she left the house, sobbing more once inside her car. But when she started the engine, she took a deep breath, the tears stopping. She felt relieved. She had finally done it. "This is for the best. Maybe we'll even get back together someday. But I need this," she thought as she drove off, leaving Jim at the table, staring blankly at the divorce papers. "What just happened?" Jim whispered to himself. The next day, Carol, Steve, and Lisa returned home. "Uncle Mark was waiting on the porch. "Before you go in, I need to talk to you. I have some bad news," Mark began. But Carol brushed past him and rushed inside, finding her father sitting on the couch, looking devastated. Uncle Ben was beside him. Ben glanced at Carol and slowly shook her head. "That witch," Carol muttered, running to her parents' bedroom. She opened the closet and saw her mother's clothes were gone. "That witch!" she screamed. It was 2 years after Janice had left. Things had been rocky at first, but she believed it was for the best. She had rebuilt a solid relationship with the kids, and even saw Jim during holidays, though he hadn't invited her for Thanksgiving yet. It was already November, and she wondered why. Janice was meeting Carol at an upscale restaurant and dance venue. It wasn't the usual spot for a mother-daughter meeting, but Carol had chosen it, joking, "Maybe we can find some men." Together they were escorted to a small, elegant booth in the back, just right for a private conversation. "Mom," Carol began calmly but firmly, "you have no idea how crushed Dad was when you left like that. He was a mess for 2 weeks and had to take time off work. He couldn't even see you for 2 months. Uncle Ben and Uncle Mark practically lived with us. You had him completely fooled. I should have warned him. I knew you were planning something, but to do it so suddenly while he was alone, that was cold. I'm sorry, Carol, I just didn't know any other way to do it. It's not like I took anything from him. I took my share of the retirement," Janice replied, though her words rang hollow. Even to her, Janice had taken little when she left, because she knew Jim would care for the kids, and her pride wouldn't let her more. Most of their savings, college funds, and retirement accounts were the result of Jim's hard work. Deep down, she always thought she might return home one day, so she kept the door open. Carol interrupted her thoughts. "Look at the bar, Mother. See those men waiting for drinks?" Janice glanced over and noticed a well-dressed man who looked particularly distinguished. "Is that Jim?" she thought in shock. "Yes, it is," Carol confirmed, her tone sharp. "You took Daddy for granted. You never saw him as desirable, but other women do. You conditioned yourself to ignore his appeal. The grass was always greener Somewhere else, wasn't it? Stunned, Janice watched Jim confidently move through the room, more polished than she remembered women were. Noticing him, and Janice felt a pang of desire she hadn't felt in years. Isn't he looking good? Mother Carol continued coldly. You ignored him and now you see what you lost. Janice realized she had overlooked Jim's good qualities, dreaming of other men. Now seeing him like this, she wanted to reconnect. She thought about asking him to dance, hoping to rekindle something. But Carol cut in. You'll never have him again. He's moved on. Janice's heart sank as she saw Jim return to his table where a younger woman stood to greet him. Michelle Ward, her former therapist. What's happening? Janice whispered in disbelief. Carol smirked. It's been hard keeping it a secret. Michelle, Shelley became interested in Daddy after your sessions. She wouldn't have pursued him back then, but after the separation, I made sure they met. As Janice watched Michelle kiss Jim, his hand resting on her pregnant belly, they got married in May. Carol revealed, pulling out an invitation Janice had declined. Didn't you get this? I've got it right here. Janice's mind spun as Carol continued. Now I'm going to be a big sister. Lisa's thrilled. She's going to be in the delivery room. I love you, Mother, Carol said, tone softening. But I had to make things right for Daddy. You cheated, took him for granted, and left us all behind. But I still love you. Janice barely heard Carol's words, lost in the realization of what she had thrown away. The life she had chosen now felt empty, and she could only imagine her future filled with loneliness. Carol gently tugged her hand. Mama, we love you. You won't be alone.